Natasha.
Debbie.
Show.
The show.
Welcome to it. Just two patriotic girls.
Learning about the world.
So please, don't take us the wrong way. Hey everybody.
Hello, welcome to the show.
Natasha and
Debbie.
Show. So if you're looking for Fishing with Bob, that's on a whole different
Keep
channel.
on looking.
I want to watch Fishing with Bob now.
Or Rick.
Rick? Why Rick?
I don't know. Ricky Bob?
Steve? Ricky Bobby? Anyway, that's not why we're sorry. So Debbie and I were just talking right before we sat down.
We were. July has just flown by.
Yeah. It's been a really fast month, and I can't believe we're about to go into August, so we need to do something to slow down summer.
We do.
Although we're really hot here. Hopefully you're not where you're at. And we thought, why don't we end this month in a very similar way that we started it? But before we tell you, well, you already know what it is. You read the description. But before we get into that,
If you like today's content, please hit that like button and consider subscribing, but only if you want to.
so we started this month off with a video,
On the Falkland War.
and that's something that you and I had never
Yeah,
learned
we
about.
hadn't really taken a look
No.
at it.
I think we had done the math, and I had figured out I was 5 months old when that happened.
I think it was 10 or 11, something
Yeah.
like that.
But the video we did there was with Simon, and it was very educational, very informative, very interesting. And, we got a lot of comments. People really liked the video, thought it was done very well.
A lot of great comments, but they also told us to take a look at Operation Black Buck.
Oh my gosh, we had more comments about that than I think anything
Mhm.
else. So we decided to, really try to look and find a video. And, we found Simon again. We
did.
thought Simon, did such a good job in the first one. Hopefully he'll do the same in this one. However, I will say, sometimes we do look at the comments of
Yes.
videos that we'll react to, and I did see a mixed bag. So just from a few comments that we read, it sounds like Simon may play down things a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why we rely on you in the comments to help us know, did he kind of miss the mark on something? Is he not really giving us the full story details?
Right. So if you have any comments, please make those down below so that we can learn more.
Absolutely.
In case Simon didn't get everything that
Yeah.
you think we should know.
Absolutely. So this video is called Operation Black Buck, the UK's mega bombing runs in the Falklands War. Without any further ado, let us learn.
It began at 10:30 p.m. on the 30th of April 1982. Two Vulcan bombers roared into the night sky above the small Atlantic islands of Ascension. Slightly ahead of them were 11 Victor refueling tankers. The aircrafts formed into their designated flight pattern and began heading southwest. What was then the longest bombing raid in history was underway. Operation Black Buck may not be a name familiar to many, but it was an extraordinary military strike carried out by the United Kingdom against Argentine forces who, just under a month before, had invaded the British Falkland Islands. But what stands out about this particular mission, and the 6 subsequent planned missions that mirrored it, is that Ascension and the Falkland Islands are a mammoth 12,200 kilometers, that's 6,600 miles apart. This was a raid that would require a single bomber to be refueled 7 times on the outbound journey, and then once again on the inbound trip.
What?
7
I mean,
times?
I don't know
Wow.
much about, I'm not a pilot.
No.
I have flown on planes, but dear Lord. Okay, I mean, I knew it was a long trip, but I didn't know they were okay.
I had no idea that they would need to refuel that many times.
Wow. So that just puts into perspective the enormity of this thing, and then what the pilots had to,
Yeah.
okay, let's keep
No
going.
wonder you guys commented to take a look at this.
Yeah, at least that's one reason why, right?
Yes.
Fueled 7 times on the outbound journey, and then once again on the inbound trip. To make matters even more complicated, some of the refueling tankers also needed to be refueled while in the air.
I bet.
It was a
Wow. I
dizzyingly
bet.
complex operation that came with a catalogue of problems along the way. As the planes disappeared into the darkness at the end of April 1982, RAF commanders, and no doubt some members of the British government, held their breath and waited. It would be roughly 16 hours until the last aircraft was scheduled to return.
Wow. I'm already got
I know.
goosebumps and nervous
Edge of my
about it.
seat.
Yeah.
For those of you already reaching for the phone to find out where exactly the Falkland Islands are, let me be of a little help. They lie roughly 296 kilometers off the coast of Argentina and 4,123 kilometers from the Great White Continent of Antarctica. As of 2016, they had a population of 3,398. and honestly, not much else. It's a landscape that is barren, windswept, and hardly seems worth fighting over. But fighting is exactly what did happen on the 2nd of April 1982 with the landing of Argentine forces who quickly overwhelmed the small garrison of Royal Marines, which at the time numbered just 57. The military junta, which held a stranglehold over Argentina since 1976, assumed that being 12,874 kilometers from Britain, the likelihood of a major offensive to retake the Falkland Islands, which Argentina calls Islas Malvinas, was pretty slim. Now, before we continue, it's probably worth giving a little backstory at this point. It's thought that natives from Patagonia may have visited the Falkland Islands in prehistoric times, but this is by no means clear. The first visitor we are sure of was an Englishman by the name of John Strong in 1690, but the first settlements didn't appear until nearly 75 years later, first with the French Port Louis on East Falklands, and then the British Port Egmont on Saunders Island. The French later withdrew their claim over the Falklands, and in doing so handed the islands to Spain, who were in turn...
I feel like it's like British, French, British, French. Who owns that place? The British or the French? I can tell you that much. At least at one point in time, right?
Exactly.
Think back further. Romans. Vikings, Romans. What?
Right.
Just expected.
Withdrew their claim over the Falklands, and in doing so handed the islands to Spain, who were in turn later forced out by the British, who have remained ever since. The question over who rightly owns the Falkland Islands appeared to have been settled, but it reared its ugly head again during the second half of the 20th century, and talks between the two governments took place during the 60s and 70s over the possibility of the islands becoming Argentine. But with the islanders firmly against that idea, it appeared that any potential ceding of the land was dead in the water. Now, that is a brief overview of the situation, but even to this day, it remains highly controversial. Check the dislike ratio on this video and the comment section below.
Okay, and like he just said, if you missed or skipped and fast forwarded our intro, why would you do that? Well, as we said earlier, we did at the beginning of this month a video on the Falklands War, where of course he goes into more detail, but still not a ton of detail, but still a lot more than we had, and it was
a much better overview of the entire war.
Absolutely. So if you want to check our reaction out to that, and you want to see a pretty good video on it, go back and give it a watch. Now, let's continue.
For the sake of brevity, we're going to leave it there, but if you want to dive into it, it really is a fascinating topic. No doubt, as Argentine forces raised their flag above Port Stanley, there was a sense of triumph, of national honor restored.
Cue the Margaret Thatcher comments.
Few around the world expected much of a response from the British government. The islands were, after all, a staggering distance from the British mainland, and it seemed utterly implausible that any kind of invasion forces would sail the full length of the Atlantic Ocean to retake a scrap of land that most in Britain would have a hard time pointing to on a map.
I said this in the Falklands video, then I'll say it again. But it's the United Kingdom. The fact that no one would think that the UK would not do something, to me, it's funny, it's comical.
Exactly.
Of course the UK is going to defend their land.
Of course.
That's
what I was thinking too. I'm like, why would you think they wouldn't
I
fight
know.
over
I'm
it?
like, what distance or not? Don't care.
Yeah.
Just like the US, if that happened here, I mean, we don't really have land outside of here, but you know what I'm saying? Hawaii's not exactly close. Someone goes to Hawaii, we're going to come get it.
Yep.
But I do want to say this quickly too, because I don't want to forget. All active duty and veterans that may be watching this, bless you for your service. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
However, as it turns out, Argentina had horribly underestimated Britain's resolve, and in particular, the determination of the Iron Lady, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
On the very same day of the invasion, approval was given to begin forming a mighty task force that would soon steam southwest. The collection of ships hastily assembled may have resembled a bit of a ragtag flotilla, but with 123 vessels eventually amassed, 43 Royal Navy vessels, 22 Royal Fleet auxiliary ships, and 62 merchant ships, it was a sizable contingent. By mid-April, the RAF had established an airbase at RAF Ascension, and around the same time ships began arriving at the islands, where they would make their final rendezvous before heading to the Falkland Islands.
Okay. Why am I nervous?
And that brings us nicely to the main focus of today's video, Operation Black Buck. As the task force began sailing southwest, British military planners were eyeing the possibility of a preemptive attack before the bulk of the invasion force arrived. If bombing raids were able to damage or destroy parts of the airport and radar systems, it would no doubt make the mission of retaking the Falkland Islands much easier. But as we now know, the distance between Britain and the Falkland Islands is immense. Ascension was seen as a viable launch pad, but even then, it would be a round trip of 16 hours.
Good Lord. Logistics would be a problem.
The logistics behind this operation were mind-boggling and extremely costly. Operation Blackbuck called for pairs of Vulcan bombers to fly southwest from Ascension to the Falklands over a period of...
Sorry, can we just take a moment to appreciate the awesomeness that is the Vulcan? I want to do a video on just the Vulcan. If you guys would like to see us do that, I'd like to learn about it more.
I would
Let us know.
definitely like to.
I know, because they're just freaking cool.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome plane.
Operation Blackbuck called for pairs of Vulcan bombers to fly southwest from Ascension to the Falklands over a period of weeks and potentially months. While 7 missions were planned, 2 were cancelled, one at the last minute due to weather conditions and the other 5 hours into the mission because of a refueling problem. While each mission would have 2 Vulcan bombers involved, only one would take part in the attack, with the other held in reserve and would return to Ascension once the first refueling had been completed. The 11 Victors, 9 active and 2 reserves, would act as refueling tankers to accompany the bombers across the ocean. Now, here's where things get a little bit complicated. As I mentioned earlier, the Vulcans would be refueled 7 times on the way to the Falklands and once on the way back, but there would also be 9 Victor-to-Victor refuels, which would enable 2 or 3 Victors to reach close to the Falklands and still be able to make it back to Ascension. The Avro Vulcans used in Operation Blackbuck were on the verge of retirement before they were hastily bundled into action in the build-up to the Falklands War. These aircraft had been introduced in 1956 to act as part of the UK's nuclear airborne deterrent, and they were high-altitude strategic bombers purposely built to carry nuclear bombs, but thankfully these were never actually needed. You definitely knew that. In fact, quite extraordinarily, the fleet of Avro Vulcans had never even taken part in real combat until the call came in April 1982. But there was a mountain...
Really? Wow. Now, we did that video on when Britain nuked America, right? Not really. But the training, exercise. We know that they had nuclear capabilities for that, but I didn't realize they'd never seen combat before, and that they started around the 50s. So, okay. That's why I want to do a whole video on this, because they're fascinating.
Part in real combat until the call came in April 1982. But there was a mountain of work to do before these old aircraft would be ready to take part in their mammoth bombing raid. The decommissioning process was so far along that the Vulcans no longer possessed their air-to-air refueling capabilities, with engineers and mechanics working around the clock to install an internal refueling system. Another issue, less major but far from simple, was that the aircraft's bomb bay had been specifically configured to carry nuclear weapons, which had to be quickly refitted to accommodate conventional weapons. Thanks to a whole lot of hard work and no doubt a little traditional British bloody-mindedness, the Vulcans were ready to go as the end of April loomed.
So they definitely had some complications there, some things to overcome. Before getting them up.
Got it taken care of.
They sure did.
Accompanying the Vulcans across the Atlantic would be a small fleet of Handley Page Victor K2 tankers. First built as conventional bombers and introduced in 1958, the majority had since been converted into fuel tankers. With only 23 Victors available and 11 needed per mission, the margins for the entire operation were thin. These were by no means new to long-distance journeys, but Operation Blackbuck would provide an entirely different set of circumstances in an area of the world that few pilots had any flight experience in. The Victors also needed an upgrade before they were ready, and the Delco Carousel Inertial Navigation System and the Omega Navigation System were both added. The second of these was the world's first global range radio system, by the way. The first Victors began arriving at Ascension on the 18th of April 1982, and by the end of the month, 15 had gathered on the small Atlantic islands. A few were used in reconnaissance flights which took place between the 20th and the 25th of April. These involved a single Victor which carried out reconnaissance, with 4 further aircraft to refuel it on the outward journey and 4 more for its return. It was a complicated relay system that was certainly not ideal, but their success paved the way for Blackbuck 1.
Blackbuck 1, you say?
Okay.
Things did not begin well for Blackbuck 1, though. 11 Victors and 2 Vulcans took off from Ascension a minute apart and turned southwest, but almost immediately the lead Vulcan ran into difficulties. The rubber seal on the captain's window had failed, leading to cold air rushing into the cabin and destabilizing the entire aircraft. Had this been a short journey, it's quite possible they would have just pushed on, but with 16 hours ahead of them, the decision was made to turn back.
Good call.
The second Vulcan, which had been the backup aircraft, now assumes the lead. As the contingent of aircraft made their way slowly towards the Falklands Islands, the Victors began their complex refueling pattern. Essentially, the idea was to keep the Vulcan as close to fully fueled as possible throughout the trip. Obviously, with it burning through 4,200 kilograms of fuel in just 34 minutes before its first refueling, it was difficult to keep up. In total, the lone Vulcan was refueled 7 times on the journey southwest, with a further 7 Victor-to-Victor refuels. Slowly, the Victors began peeling away to return to Ascension, and eventually just 3 aircraft remained: the Vulcan and 2 Victors, for the final leg of the journey.
Wow.
As if things were not difficult enough, the trio flew into a violent thunderstorm, which damaged the refueling probe of one of the Victors. Emerging from the storm, the damaged aircraft turned for home as the final Victor began the final refueling, but even here, things did not go according to plan.
Seriously?
As a result of the storm and problems with earlier refuelings, the fuel transfer to the Vulcan was around 3,200 kilograms less than had been planned for, meaning the margin for the refueling stop on the return trip was now very, very tight. With refueling complete, the final Victor turned for home, leaving the lone Vulcan to continue through the night sky. As it approached the Falklands, it dipped down to just 91 meters above sea level to stay under enemy radar before climbing steeply as it neared its target, Port Stanley Airport. 21,000-pound, 453-kilogram bombs rained down from a height of 3,000 meters, with the Vulcan banking sharply the moment the last bomb dropped. Sea Harriers based on HMS Invincible, which was heading southwest, readied themselves to assist the Vulcan if enemy fighters attempted to intercept it, but nothing happened. The Vulcan roared away from the Falkland Islands and was refueled by a returning Victor before continuing and landing back at Ascension at 14:52, 16 hours and 22 minutes after it had left. While the mission was a success in that no aircraft had been lost and bombs had indeed been dropped on Port Stanley Airport, it's difficult to argue that it caused damage worthy of the Herculean effort of those involved. One bomb created a large crater on the runway, which was later botched on repair, providing a minor headache for the Argentine forces, but it was hardly significant damage. We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail regarding Black Bucks 2 through 7, not because they weren't extraordinary feats of military aviation, but because they followed roughly the same pattern as the first, and it would be really boring. Black Buck 2 was conducted a week after the first sortie with the bomb.
I did get that.
I mean, again, the world's longest bombing. You know?
I mean, it continued for a while, obviously. Yeah. Now, I just have to say, I am absolutely amazed how planes can refuel in the air. It just boggles my mind.
I know.
Bombs completely missing the runway. However, damage to the western section of the airstrip did mean that it couldn't be extended to accommodate high-performance combat aircraft. Black Buck 3 was cancelled shortly before takeoff due to strong headwinds, while Black Buck 4 was cancelled 5 hours after takeoff because of damage to one of the Victors. This was set to be the first mission to carry the American Shrike anti-radar missiles, and as you can probably guess, the target was the island's radar station. Black Buck 5 also targeted the island's radar defenses, but for this mission, a decoy was needed. The Shrike missiles being used would latch on to the radar's transmission, and in theory, as long as the radar continued transmitting throughout the attack, the missile could home in on it. With this in mind, a decoy Sea Harrier was sent out to buzz noisily around the island. One Shrike missile landed a short distance from the radar, causing only minor damage, while the other missed by a considerable margin. Black Buck 6 began on June the 3rd and failed to make any meaningful impact against the radar stations once again. In fact, all the drama occurred on the way home. Damage to the Vulcan's refueling pod meant that it couldn't take on any fuel on the return trip home, so diverted to Brazil, where a Mayday signal was sent. Brazilian fighter jets intercepted the bomber and escorted it to Rio de Janeiro, where it landed with just 910 kilograms of fuel left. In aviation terms, that's basically empty. The incident caused a real headache because it revealed for the first time that the Americans had been supplying the British with the Shrike missiles, while in public they remained relatively neutral.
Sorry.
This was conveniently hushed up at the time with the help of the Americans and only fully came to light after the conflict had ended. Black Buck 7 occurred on June the 12th, with the focus switching back to the airport, though this time it was aircraft, ammunition stores and infantry facilities that were the targets. The plan had been to fuse the bomb so that they would airburst, explode before hitting the ground to destroy buildings, but not the runway. But a human error meant that the exact opposite had been done. In the end, it didn't really matter, though almost all of the bombs missed their targets, and as you would have it anyway, Argentine forces surrendered 2 days later.
Well, I mean, yeah, think about psychological warfare on top of just physical damage, too. Like, both of those things are very impactful. So, I mean, he can say, okay, well, this didn't hit its target, this didn't hit its target, this was canceled. But still, you know, the amount of terror that rained down from this air raid, I guess you could call it, this bombing, would be something that would definitely affect you for the rest of your life.
Well, to be down there and knowing that the United Kingdom's coming after you? And
Debbie.
Now, I'm well aware that we've actually kind of skipped over the details of the war here, so let's quickly fill you in on the details about what happened after the task force arrived. The first engagements between Argentine and British forces came in the sky and at sea. The task force was attacked on numerous occasions, with the sinking of 4 British ships: HMS Argent, HMS Cantaloupe, HMS Coventry, and HMS...
Did he just say HMS Cantaloupe?
He did say cantaloupe,
When he
even
meant
though
antelope?
the screen said antelope.
Sorry.
Mistakes happen.
That is funny.
I make plenty.
Oh, I've made plenty on here. Don't point them out, please. But that was just funny. I'm sorry. HMS Cantaloupe. I mean, I said in the Falklands video we did, I love the name of HMS Invincible. But if you guys name a carrier HMS Cantaloupe, I'll choose that as my new favorite.
Forces came in the sky and at sea.
Sorry.
The task force was attacked on numerous occasions, with the sinking of 4 British ships: HMS Argent, HMS Cantaloupe, HMS Coventry, and HMS Sheffield, as well as other smaller crafts. But it was the sinking of the Argentine ARA General Belgrano,
Which everyone told us was originally our ship, and we didn't know this. So thank you in the comments from the last video that we did. Epic had no idea.
Yes.
This was survived Pearl Harbor. So that was incredible. We did not know that. So thank you for letting us know. I mean, how would we know if the name changed?
We learned just as much in the comments from you guys as we do watching the videos. So
Sometimes
thank you
more
so
in the
much.
comments. Wouldn't you agree, though?
Sometimes more, yeah.
Depends on how well the video is done.
Exactly.
So, but we appreciate it.
the death of 300 of her crew that hit the headlines.
Jeez,
Initially,
300.
Argentina claims that the ship had been moving back to port and away from the exclusion zone set up by the British, but an Argentine commander has since stated that this was not true, and the Belgrano had orders to sink any British ship that it encountered. However, it was a shocking loss of life that accounted for half of all Argentine deaths during the conflict and led to the entire Argentine fleet returning to port, where it remained until the end of the war. British forces began landing on East Falkland on the 21st of May, with the numbers swelling over the next 2 weeks. Despite their brave resistance, the Argentine forces couldn't hope to match the well-trained British army, and a series of defeats put the British forces at the edge of Port Stanley, the Falklands capital, on the 11th of June. 3 days later, it was all over. The entire war had lasted just short of 6 weeks and had cost the lives of 649 Argentine soldiers and 255 British. While British prestige may have been re-established,
Sincerest condolences, respects to all lives lost. All lives lost.
And injured.
Absolutely.
Argentine soldiers and 255 British. While British prestige may have been re-established, it's difficult not to view the entire conflict as an absurd waste of life.
That's not for us to say and sit here and...
The impact that Operation Black Buck had on the Falklands War has long been debated. At best, it forced the Argentine military to withdraw a large number of its aircraft back to the mainland in anticipation of a strike against Buenos Aires. This, of course, never happened, and in fact, British commanders even stated that no attacks would be carried out against the mainland, no doubt attempting to shore up shaky international support. If you look at the cost, risk, and sheer complexities of the Black Buck raids measured against the damage they caused, the attacks look like a ridiculous venture. The hard truth is that the British Army, Navy, and Air Force were superior to the Argentines in almost every way, and their success owed much more to that simple fact than any long-distance bombing raids. But let's throw logic aside for a second. When Black Buck 1 was successfully completed, it became the longest successful bombing raid in history, a record that stood until 2001 when US B-2 bombers flew for a staggering 44 hours to strike targets in Afghanistan before returning home. But this was in an age of high-tech computers and automated systems.
Agreed.
Back in 1982, things were much more rudimentary. The Black Buck raids may not have inflicted considerable damage, but their planning and execution were nothing short of extraordinary.
Okay, I learned a lot from this, but I do feel, as I said at the beginning of the video from the comments we read, it did seem like, heck with it. It's so frustrating. It happens all the time. No, because it always does that when I leave it alone. I do feel like Simon may have gone over certain parts of things that we probably could have learned from this, but again, within the time that we have to give a normal reaction video, we have done some longer things.
Right.
Some of the videos we were looking up were 2 hours, hour and a half, hour.
At least, yeah. So we wanted to keep it a little bit shorter.
Get the bones of it, right?
Yeah, but get a good, concise description of what happened. And I think Simon does a pretty good job of that. Although, like you said,
I just, yeah,
I
I
went
feel
a little
like
bit too fast over.
I feel like there's a big
Part or two.
spot that we're kind of missing here. So again, in the comments, let us know facts that he skipped over. I want to know more about the other, not Operation Black Book, but Black Book 1, but the 2 to 7. Like he just gave little things, and I feel like that's not the full story. But I think he was a little focused on the refueling process, which is interesting. But I'm like, there's got to be more to this than this, and I know that there is. So again, let us know of some facts that you think would be good for us to know that he did not provide, because I'm sure there's plenty of them.
Yes, I'm sure there is. The video was absolutely helpful to me, I think. And I'm sure there is a lot more to it than just the refueling. I'm sure there was more to the bombing and the specifics of it, getting everything timed out.
Yeah. And like I said, he may say that, the physical damage wasn't that bad, but, it's people also kind of got upset with us because we said war. I know that the technical term for this is conflict, but, just my personal opinion, when there's loss of life, I don't know that the victims would agree that the word conflict is appropriate. And that's just a personal thing. So I might call it a war. But, yeah, I just think that the psychological aspect of it, I had a great uncle who was in World War II, and he was shell-shocked.
Right.
Really badly. And I saw some of that, but my mom saw much more of it. He would jump behind a chair or a couch when he would hear like a plane going by sometimes. And it was very effective. So I know, from experience and personally witnessing certain things like that I'm sure that was much more horrifying. It's easier for somebody to sit back, doing a video on something that never been in the military or in a war or whatever.
Yeah, if you get into battle, you're going to see things, experience things that are going to change you.
Yeah.
And again, thank you to any active military people. Thank you.
And veterans, of course. Thank you as well. And thank you all for watching today. We appreciate you. And we look forward to seeing you in August. Until then, love like jazz.
Be as strong as Tyson.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye.